Hello, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Katerji Show with me, your host, Katerji. Joining me tonight is former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele, author of the now infamous Steele Dossier. We're going to talk to him about that, about how that played out with Trump, how much that stacks up. Today we've learned so much more about Donald Trump's view about Vladimir Putin, his relationship with Russia, his views towards Russia in the last few months. So it'd be really interesting to revisit some of those strands, but also talking to Christopher to ask him his opinion on the recent Trump-Putin summit. And yeah, really dive into trying to understand more about the whole situation. So without further ado, thank you to Christopher for joining us, my very special guest, Christopher Steele. Welcome to the show, Christopher. Oh, you've gone mute again.
I think it was defaulting onto my iPhone, actually.
There we go. Well, we figured it out in the end. Welcome to the show, Christopher Steele.
Thank you.
Yeah. So technical difficulties aside, normally at the start of the show, I asked our guests to explain a bit about themselves, because for many of our audience, they won't know anything about the Steele Dossier. It's actually quite a long time ago now. It doesn't seem a long time ago to me, but to our younger audience on this younger platform, they might not know. Now, the reason I've wanted to invite you on the show is I think a lot of it really stacks up really well today, and you've obviously gone through immense, difficulties over it, and really just a chance to get your side of the story across and talk about what we know now about Donald Trump and Putin and what's playing out, especially with someone of your background. So could you tell us about that background?
Yeah, absolutely. So after university, I was at Cambridge University, where I studied political science. And after university, I went into British Foreign Service and served as a diplomat and an intelligence officer, specializing on the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union as it became, and Russia. And I served in the embassy in Moscow for 3 years around the collapse of the Soviet Union, subsequently later in Paris. And then in 2009, I left the government service and set up a private business intelligence company called Orbis Business Intelligence with a former colleague, Chris Burrows. And then we worked in the private sector and fairly low profile until 2016-17, when we got a job from contacts, associates in America, to report on Russia's attitude towards, policy towards, interference in the American presidential election of 2016, which saw Donald Trump come to office. And as part of that, we were some of the first to highlight, I think, the very odd, and we'll talk about this, relationship between Trump and Russia and Trump and Putin. And subsequently, our work was leaked to the media without our permission in early 2017, and then subsequently became very well known around the world and debated and investigated and so on, and indeed litigated subsequently in quite spectacular fashion, and still is being litigated. And then, of course, our low profile changed to being very high profile. And I've become, quite well known commentator in the media, and subsequently off the back of that. So I'm in a different sort of skin and a different role and function, really, than I was before.
So I guess, look, we should probably tell this story in kind of chronological order. I suppose what would be interesting to do is, again, a lot of people who have heard about the Steele Dossier probably haven't read the Steele Dossier. And again, it wasn't a series of proven facts that you were laying out, right? This was the early stage of the research. Can you tell us what it was intended for, and why you think it got blown out? Once those unverified rumors hit the press, it was kind of like you couldn't contain the reaction, as it were. But if you could explain kind of it in detail as to what it was to a complete layman, or maybe someone who doesn't even remember that era, because it would really help to prime us on the conversation to follow, I guess.
So I think it was a continuation of our work using Russian sources to look at Russian politics and Russian foreign policy and the Russian intelligence services and what they were doing to the West and in the West. And what it was essentially was, as I say, looking particularly at how they were reacting to and interfering in the American presidential election of 2016. It wasn't looking at it from the American end of the telescope, it was looking at it from the Kremlin end of the telescope. And when we went into this project, we had no preconceived ideas. We had a couple of leads to go on, but nothing concrete, nothing firm. And then over the course of 6 months, I suppose, or 5 months, working on this project for an American client who was linked to eventually the Clinton campaign itself. And we discovered some fairly startling things about Russia and about Trump and Russia and about Trump's campaign in Russia. Things which at the time were not accepted as gospel and were not shared amongst the cognoscenti and commentators, but boiled down to, I think, four things really. One was that Russia was interfering in a systematic and significant way in the American presidential election. The second thing was that they were doing so not just to create chaos and sow doubts in the American democracy, but to aid Donald Trump and to damage Hillary Clinton, who was a particular enemy as seen by Putin at the time, as a result of her sort of human rights, if you like, support in Russia before that, and particularly in 2011. Thirdly, that there was evidence that the top leadership in Russia had ordered this operation. It wasn't just something that was going on a routine level or a working level or even a level of the intelligence services. It was ordered by Putin himself. And fourthly, that there were elements of what we called collusion, or what the sources called collusion, between people in the Trump campaign and Russia and Russian agents. And I think those things were pretty startling at the time, pretty shocking at the time. They may be taken as read now, they may be taken for granted if you look at the way Trump behaved, for example, in Alaska towards Putin. But certainly at the time, they were regarded as revolutionary and I think set the agenda then for the subsequent 4 years of the Trump presidency.
So there's so much that I want to talk about the stuff that basically we did find out in those court cases, and to follow and to bring us right up to date to talk about Tulsi Gabbard, what she's doing, and how that's impacting the situation, the political situation in the United States today. But I can't move on to the serious stuff if I don't talk about, at least once, ask the question that the entire internet was talking about back in 2016 was, did the Russians have compromat on Donald Trump? Was there some sort of salacious tape that included Donald Trump in a compromising situation? That's the question that everyone was talking about. Basically, if you cycle all the way back to that the era when the Steele Dossier did blow up on social media. As you said, it was leaked to the press. Maybe you could also talk to us about that leak and the impact that leak really had on you.
Yeah, I think just starting with the leak, probably, and of course, one wants to avoid puns here. So initially, it was clear from our sources who were tried and tested, who were established sources who'd been reporting on Russia to us for many years beforehand, that there were multiple sources saying that the Russians had sexual compromat on Donald Trump and probably financial compromat on Donald Trump, going back many years, at least till 2013 and possibly earlier. We had no reason to doubt those sources, and their reporting had never really been challenged or overturned by clients and others who we'd served previously. And of course, we had a good knowledge of the modus operandi, the MO of the Russian intelligence services, which was to use, particularly in Moscow hotels and elsewhere in Russia, tapes compromising people in embarrassing situations. You only need to look at the way that they'd done that, for example, to Skaratov, their own prosecutor general in the 1990s, They'd also done it subsequently to Mikhail Kazyanov, who was a prime minister of Russia in the early noughties, I think. And so this didn't come at all as a surprise. And in a sense, what was surprising was the claim that, Donald Trump had fallen into this trap. But he wouldn't have been the first, and he wouldn't have been the only one to have done so, to our knowledge at least. And so the whole thing seemed to fit together, and the chronology fitted together. Trump subsequently implied that he hadn't spent the night in Moscow in the hotel around the Miss Universe contest in 2013. Of course, it turned out that he did, and that he didn't actually have his bodyguard on the door that night of his room. And so I think a lot of those things add up to a sort of probability situation. You can never be sure with sources or intelligence. It's not a science. In many ways, it's more of a social science or an art form. But from our point of view, it was serious reporting, and it needed to be brought to the attention of the relevant authorities, because the risk that a presidential candidate in America might have been compromised by the Russian intelligence services was too great an issue, particularly for us, given our government service previously, to sit on and not to share with the security authorities in both America and the UK.
So look, again, I want to dive into that in more detail, but before that, I wanted to sidebar very quickly because you mentioned, getting information from sources, and we saw a lot of so-called Russia experts really humiliate themselves in February 2022, whereas you were someone who was much more you were one of the people that was warning about the seriousness of the threat from Russia going all the way back. So how do you feel that the way that you were sourcing information about Russia stacks up? Looking, obviously we have the benefit of hindsight here, but I was one of the people that did see the invasion coming, which is why I headed to Kyiv at the start of the war with our mutual friend John Sweeney. So it's it's kind of interesting to talk to, and I've spoken to many experts that got this big question wrong. So it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts about sourcing. Again, you're someone who has had their professional integrity attacked quite a lot, and I think that is really unfair, given that you have been right about the things that a lot of experts have been, so-called experts, have been wrong about. So really your chance to talk to us about the strength of your sourcing and why you got things right in this instance, and how you think some of the things that you thought in the past stack up, given what we know now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you run sources, obviously I've been in the business of diplomacy and intelligence for nearly 40 years. And I'm a specialist and an expert on this part of the world that we're talking about, the former Soviet Union, which includes Ukraine, of course, as well as Russia. And we had been working with sources both within government and then subsequently in the private sector for many years before this so-called dossier was produced. And I think that whilst we are very cognizant of the context in which intelligence is produced, the fact that, for example, in Russia, as I've spoken about many times, people in the leadership lie to each other, they exaggerate things, they distort, they don't own up to certain things that are happening. And this is part of the mismanagement, I suspect, of the war from the Kremlin as well, which we might come on to. We're aware of all the subtleties of that. I mean, the problem, I think, with the dossier was that it was produced almost like live news bulletins in real time. And it was designed to be briefed orally to the client, not produced as a full written report with analytical work attached to it, because the situation was so fast moving. An analytical comment was added orally by me and others in the presentation of this material. But it was multiple source. They were established sources. We had no reason to doubt them. Certainly things like chronology added up, people's movements added up, things we were seeing in the public sphere, like Trump calling on the Russians to produce the Hillary Clinton emails, which was extraordinary. The fact that the Russians leaked details of that just as Trump was coming under pressure in relation to his comments about women, grabbing women and so on. So I think there were a lot of background factors going on at the time which suggested that we were, as we say in English, barking up the right tree. And of course, nothing is certain and nothing is 100% accurate. But I think those four main thrusts of the reporting, which I mentioned to you earlier, hold up very well and still do all these years later, despite the fact that we've been attacked mercilessly by political partisans in the Republican Party and elsewhere, claiming that we were partisan. We are not. We are apolitical. We are professionals. We do our work, and we deliver what we think is an objective, truth of what's being told to us. And so, also in the law courts, and of course, we've won almost all the cases we fought in the courts as well. So I think we've been reasonably well vindicated. I'm under no illusions as to the way in which the information, particularly in the US, about us has been distorted massively by the media and our political opponents. I would say that since 2022 and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, certainly in the UK and other European countries, I think our work is taken very seriously, and so are we, which is why I get constant requests to come on shows like yourself and other live television and so on, very high-profile shows and interviews, to try and bring light onto what is a very dark situation.
So, yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity for us to talk about the stuff that did hold up, because so much of that now is we have a second Trump administration. The total disaster scenario for the Democrats really did happen, not just for the Democrats, for those of us who believe in liberal democracy have really taken a hit with that. But there is now an effort to rewrite the history that was established in multiple court cases. Oh, we've just lost you there. There we go.
Dropped for some reason. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. So this was
why it dropped.
This was established in multiple court cases. That there was an effort from the Russian government to help Donald Trump win an election that involved hacking the Democratic National Convention emails. It involved, a multi-prong assault on the American democratic process. The question was never really to what degree did this influence the outcome of the election, which is often the contention, the point of contention that I've seen floating around in or at least before, during the Biden administration. We've gone full circle back to total denial that anything happened at all. But a lot of this stuff was proven. So can you talk to us about, those few years in which the court cases really should be vindicating the kind of warning signs that you were writing about so early on?
Yeah, and of course, it's important not to take the dossier, as it's called, out of context of other things that we'd been doing and reporting on at that time, which included, for example, the use of energy as a political weapon by Russia, which is a very profound issue and problem, of course. Its intentions towards its neighbours, in particular Ukraine, which we had reported on as early as 2014 and perhaps even before that. Plus other issues where Russia was clearly turning into a rogue state. So its assassination program abroad, its targeting of dissidents and critics and so on, as we'd seen with as early as Litvinenko and subsequently with people like Skripal and so on. And even things like, the fact that that Putin was very heavily involved, for example, in corrupt business and with organized crime, which was part of the system that he was setting up. It was clear to us at an early point, indeed, when I was back in government and then confirmed later by other reporting, that we were not dealing with a normal politician here. We were not dealing with a normal government, a government that you could talk to on your own level and understand as being motivated by the public good and by seeking peace and prosperity for the country in a way that you would hope and actually expect to be the case in the West. So we were dealing with a very strange creature, and it was clear to us, it was clear to me in government, and then very clear to us subsequently, that Western European and American governments, many of the ministers and secretaries of state and others, just didn't really understand what they were dealing with here. And of course, by mishandling Russia and by appeasing Russia, have encouraged Russia on to become ever more aggressive, expansionist, imperialistic, militaristic, autocratic in a way that we're seeing now at its apex in Ukraine, but also in things like the SCO summit we're witnessing unfolding in Beijing at the moment, or in Tianjin, or wherever they are. And so, in a sense, it's been incredibly depressing and frustrating for us, but also reassuring professionally that we got the big calls about this right, and that we were dealing with a country under Putin that the West could not have a stable and peaceful relationship with.
Yeah, and ultimately, we are where we are. The things that happened, and now we are in a position where, even trying to get the truth, the established truth, out is under increasing pressure in the United States. Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's handpicked director of national intelligence, has started releasing all sorts of information, trying to shed doubt on the established facts that multiple court cases in the United States established about what took place with regards to Russian interference in the US election of 2016. Can you talk to us about what's happening today with everything, and how all of this is still going on? And do you think that you are in a position where you might find yourself being found in a similar situation to John Bolton, Ambassador John Bolton, recently having his house raided by the FBI? This is a really concerning situation for anyone that may be, even as you say, you are non-partisan, that may be perceived to be a political enemy of the Trump administration.
Sure. I mean, going back, though, into history, we have to mention a couple of undeniable facts which ask a bunch of questions in themselves, quite apart from anything we ever reported about Russia and Trump. The first is that Trump's house in Florida in, I think it was 2008, was bought by a Russian oligarch regarded as close to the regime for double its value. And that was at a time when Trump was facing one of his many bankruptcy proceedings. And you have to ask yourself what on earth was going on there. And subsequently, of course, as became clear, the so-called Trump Tower meeting, where Veselnitskaya turned up, as you know, and said, as part of the Kremlin support for your father's campaign, we'd like to share compromat on Hillary Clinton, which Donald Trump Jr. and others initially were very happy to accept that concept. So I think that, the facts speak for themselves. The historical record speaks for itself. And attempts now by people around Trump and so on to deny that there was any Russian interference and that it was in favor of Trump, is particularly their concern to try and deny, is ludicrous, and it just makes a mockery of them. And I actually don't think these are very serious people. They're not people who are remotely suited or qualified to be holding these sort of jobs. In fact, Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, was a guy who came to London in 2017 as a junior committee staffer in the House of Representatives on the Intelligence Committee, literally trying to hunt me and my colleagues down in London. So this is not the behaviour of a serious country or a serious government, but it's what we are now faced with. As far as the threats to me are concerned, yes, I mean, Trump has named me 3 times, I think, in the last couple of months in public. He's targeted me with litigation, which we should come back to, because he's lost all of it, hands down, and owes us actually a lot of money as a result of that. But also the fact that I'm in the UK means I have not vulnerability to the sort of pressures of in and revenue and all these other things that Trump and the others are turning on their critics. It would be pretty impossible, I think, for the John Bolton raid to be replicated here in the UK, although I don't ever rule anything out entirely.
Yeah, I mean, not planning on traveling to the United States at any point, then I take it at the moment, probably quite wisely. So look, let's talk about the litigation, not just, the cases themselves, but how it's impacted you, because again, you are a human being and your life has been totally upended by what is a professional body of work that I think, and that I will argue, and I think many people should be able to argue when actually looking at the facts, that really did stack up very well compared to what we ended up finding out over the course of the last few years. So talk to us about those cases. And we have a question from the audience, Brian McDonough, councillor, saying, Councillor Brian McDonough, there you go, is saying, is Christopher able to do the same work, and did any sources dry up or get compromised following, I guess, the leak and the fallout from it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the issue of protecting sources, of course, any intelligence professional will tell you that that is the key objective and the overriding objective of any operation or any work. And the problem is, of course, that this American administration doesn't abide by those rules. And certainly some of our sources, including those who were subsequently working for the American government itself, were needlessly and recklessly identified and exposed. In particular, a guy called Igor Danchenko. And one doesn't normally talk about these things, of course, but the reality is that he had been working for the US government. He was described by his FBI case officer as the best source the FBI had had on Russia for 20 years. And yet he was still put on trial as a result of the farcical Durham investigation for perjury and cleared on all 5 counts. So this American administration is certainly in the business of declassifying documents recklessly, of exposing sources in Russia. One would think probably to deter other sources from coming forward. And I think those facts really sort of speak for themselves. And the fact that so much litigation followed this, there have been so many attacks on me and our work and my colleagues and our sources. If this had been some kind of amateur job, that had been some political partisan story that had been made up, which is what they're claiming was a hoax, these people would not be bothered. Trump would still not be talking about me 8 years, 9 years later as somebody who he regards as having had a significant impact on his political career and his administration. And I don't take any joy from that, but I think you have to recognize that's exactly the way people behave when you've caused them significant damage by telling the truth.
So again, so if I could pick you up again on those cases, because again, you talked about you've won them. Could you just talk to us a little bit about the legal pressure that you've been under?
Well, yes, we've been in constant litigation defending ourselves since, I think, January 2017. So that's what, 8.5 years, something like that. And the reality is that at no time we've had less than one case in operation. We were sued by Russians on, I think, 4 occasions. We've been sued by Donald Trump twice, once in America and once in UK. And we were dragged into probably 3 or 4 at least other cases. So we've probably had in total 10 cases emerging from this, civil cases under various laws that have been thrown at us, both in the US and in the UK. And of all those that we've been involved in, we've arguably won all of them except for one, which was a bit of a score draw, I would argue, which is a pretty phenomenal record. But of course, it's put tremendous strain on us, on our work, on our clients, on our insurers, on our sources, afraid of being exposed and so on, and trying to deter all that coming out of America in particular, Russia initially, and then America subsequently. And so, yes, it's been a life-changing experience, and not one that I would wish on my worst enemy.
Yeah, I mean, look, it sounds frankly unimaginable. So, and again, you said you're not planning on visiting the United States anytime soon. So, look, I've got another question from the audience, and I think we could spend the second half of the show talking about Ukraine and unless you had something you want to say.
Can I just mention one other thing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I had a book called Unredacted: Russia, Trump, and the Fight for Democracy that was published in America last October in hardback, and is still available there, and is available on Amazon.com. And that does describe a lot of these things. Hopefully, it will be a good read for people to look at to get an idea of how complicated and kind of the scale of this story, really, I think, to be honest.
Well, listen, I will definitely put your link to that book unredacted in the show notes. So if you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube on Catch Up, check the description. It will be in there. So we'll definitely make sure they do that. We have an audience question from Byron Boat. Saying, during my time as a white-collar investigator, we frequently saw Russian involvement in financial markets. From a policy perspective, how do we clamp down on capital investment from Russian oligarchs in London?
Yeah, I think to some extent it's happened anyway because of the invasion of Ukraine and subsequent sanctions. I mean, you would hope that our regulatory authorities and our prosecutorial authorities would have been on top of this. They clearly weren't, despite the fact that we had worked for them from time to time and advised them. Money is a very powerful weapon, tool, influencer, far more so, I think, than ideology was in the old days. And the reality is that a whole wall of money came in particular towards London from Russia in the noughties and in the early 2010s, which seduced a large number of people, provided higher end salaries for lawyers, for accountants, for PR companies, and of course spilled over, unfortunately, but perhaps inevitably, into lobbying and into the political sphere. And we saw the apex of that, I think, with Boris Johnson's relationship with the Lebedevs. So I think that London had a particular importance to Russians and Russia. It's a love-hate relationship because Putin and the others know fully well that the British intelligence services and British experts on Russia have a much more accurate view of what's really going on there than almost any other country in the world. But we're drawn to the country because of its language, its position, its location, and I think probably, sadly, because of its rather lax regulations and particularly offshore entity regulations in its dependent territories. Like the BVI and Guernsey and Jersey, Isle of Man, and so on, played a big part in that. So I think we failed up until 2022. I think we've been doing a lot better since, but almost for the wrong reasons, and it's been forced on us rather than something we did of our own volition. And the concern has been that our institutions in the UK, unlike actually in America, where the SEC and others, OFAC and so on, are very strong and well established and have got deterrence emanate or had until Trump came back under various laws. We don't really have that in the UK. We have a bribery act that's never really been implemented, and we have ineffective agencies that deal with financial crime, and that's a big problem.
Well, look, we've got 2,000 viewers tuning in at the moment, so clearly talking about things that really interest. If you're tuning in on Twitch, the only way on Twitter or X.com, as it were, I hate calling it that. If you're tuning in there, the only way to contact us, to talk to us, to ask questions is to follow along on Twitch, to sign up an account. So please do follow along, sign up, make an account, and come do ask us a question. We are asking Christopher Steele kindly. He's answering the questions put to him by the audience tonight. So if you're interested, want to ask a question, please do jump over to Twitch to do so, because I can't see the Twitter messages up here. So back to you, Christopher. I wanted to ask you about the situation, obviously, in Ukraine. That's something that's mattered to you quite a lot too, professionally. Can you talk to us about when you started getting an inkling from the intelligence side of things that an invasion was coming, and and then we can start really moving forward from there?
Yes, I think the challenge we had actually back in 2021, beginning of 2022, is that we could see that Russia didn't really have the capability, certainly deployed on the border, to launch a successful full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It was very clear that you can't control a country of that size, 40 million plus, that's hostile to you, with 150,000 troops. So there was a sort of split view about this amongst me and my colleagues. We were getting information that something was going to happen, that was going to be military in nature. But our best sort of assessment at the time was we would see an attempt to grab the whole of the Donbass, basically. And that, of course, has been an important part of what we've seen since 2022. But I don't think we envisaged the full scale nature of this attempt, which, of course, failed dismally in so many ways, for precisely the reasons that we had discerned, that logistically and politically and financially, and in terms of military strength, we were not seeing what we would have seen, for example, before Operation Barbarossa in 1941, or indeed in Iraq, before the American invasion of that country. So I think there was a dilemma, but we were aware that something was going to happen. I think something we underestimated, all of us, all along, was just how obsessed with Ukraine Putin himself personally is. And I think that's been one of the real eye openers through this last few years, that actually it's a total obsession of his. And it's not just, I want to rebuild the Soviet Union. I think there are deeper issues here. I think one of them is incorporating, dare I say, a white Orthodox Slav population into the Russian heartland, because of the fact that the Russian population in the Federation itself is changing in structure, and the areas that are growing in population are not heartland Orthodox Russian Christians. I also think that it's tied up with the whole issue of Trump Russia, and the whole issue of why Ukraine featured so prominently in so many ways in the whole of the history of the Trump Russia relationship, whether it was what Rudy Giuliani was up to, or what Hunter Biden was supposed to have been up to, or Manafort, of course, who was very active and experienced at operating in Ukraine, worked for Yanukovych and so on, who became the head of Trump's campaign, after all, very surprisingly, in 2016. So you can see a thread here. And the thread is that Putin, above all else, his legacy will be his attempt to subjugate Ukraine. And at the moment, he's failing dismally in that. And I think his only chance of any sort of success being pulled out of the fire is Donald Trump.
So look, it's a perfect time to swing the conversation back to Donald Trump, because I did want to pick your brains on the Trump-Putin summit. And, really it'd be helpful if you could, I mean, obviously not interested in you revealing anything sensitive, but, what information what intelligence are you gathering at the moment about what Putin's intentions are going forward? And what can you tell us about what you think the likely outcome of these conversations will be, or rather what you think the Russians are trying to get from them? We've had many guests on the show talking about that, and the general view is that we're not heading to any kind of peace at the moment, because Putin doesn't want it. So does that ring true with the information that you're gathering at the moment?
Yeah, sure. We continue to cover these issues through our sources and others. I think that what's clear is that there are certain red lines for Putin now. I mean, don't forget the sacrifice that Russia has made in this war, as it will be seen by the Russian people. They've lost nearly 1 million men, killed and injured. Their armed forces have been decimated. They've lost 11,000 tanks. They've lost 400 aircraft. They've lost 28 warships. Ironically, the Black Sea Fleet, which was one of the supposed reasons for wanting to occupy Crimea to secure its base there at Sevastopol, has been driven out of the Black Sea into the Sea of Azov. And I mean, we chuckle about it. Of course, there's nothing funny about the war, but there are ironies in the war, and that's certainly a big one. So I think Putin's red lines are that he can't deal with Zelensky directly. He can't agree a ceasefire before there's some kind of agreement over a land grab. But I think at a more fundamental level, Putin's aims in this war have not changed, and they're actually not territorial. It's not, a real estate deal, as Donald Trump and Witkoff seem to think. That's a misunderstanding of what's driving Putin. Putin wants to neuter Ukraine and hopefully um, carve up Ukraine as an independent country going forward. Nothing less than that really will satisfy. And so anything else in between is going to be subterfuge, kicking the can down the road, being deceitful about your objectives, about settling for maybe less than you initially wanted, but you don't still back off for good. This war will start up again unless the Russian army, in my view, is defeated or Putin is toppled. And I think that is the bottom line here. And at the moment, neither of those things are happening.
Well, look, let me be honest. I'm quite a hawk on Russia, and have been throughout my career. And back in 2013, 2014, 2015, it was a very unpopular thing to be a Russia hawk. You know, I remember Obama batting down any suggestion that that Russia should even be considered a rival and so on. Whereas I was reporting about what was playing out in Syria, and I saw, you know, very dangerous things happening. So you know, again, I'm quite hawkish on this matter, and I agree with you that a significant defeat, not necessarily a military defeat, but a understanding of a tactical strategic defeat for the Russians is the only thing that will really have an impact on this war, you know, coming to some kind of end. Speaking to the former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba a couple of weeks ago, though, he said that even if Ukraine was to push Russia back all the way to those, you know, borders, that he believes anyway that Russia would continue to be in a state of war with Ukraine, that even that kind of level of defeat wouldn't be enough to stop Russia from trying to invade again. So I guess the question really is, you know, what is the outcome of this? What is the policy outcome that can try and achieve this? So Keir Starmer's talking about a coalition of the willing. Macron has spoken about that, but all of that is predicated on the idea that it's enforcing some kind of freezing of the lines, and there seems to be no indication that we're heading for a freezing of the lines, for there to be a force on the ground to enforce. And, you know, that force on the ground would be absolutely against anything. That would be a total disaster for Russia if there were foreign troops on Ukrainian
Certainly
soil.
NATO, from NATO countries. I mean, you could potentially envisage something involving India and China and one or two other places, perhaps Turkey. But the reality is that this is not a territorial war. It is fought on territory, as all wars are fought on territory. The reality is that it's a political war, and it's a war against Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. And unless people understand that, and they also understand the degree to which Putin is obsessed with this issue, I can envisage if Putin were to die or to be toppled tomorrow, you could potentially get an unpleasant but more pragmatic Russian leader who is less committed to this aggressive war coming to office. And changing a degree of policy, you'd still end up with some kind of frozen conflict, which I think is how this will end. Certainly, you know, I was brought up in Cyprus, and I know from that exactly what frozen conflicts look like. You know, maybe it's now 50 years since that conflict broke out. But I think that's probably the upper end of, or the better end of expectations. And I think that the problem, obviously, at the heart of this, and whilst people in government in Western Europe won't talk about it openly, although Merz has come close, the German leader, chancellor, is the fact that America and Trump are not committed to the sovereignty or independence of Ukraine. They're not committed really to European defence even. Certainly Vance isn't, the vice president. And I think that is a real departure from the post-war world that we've known and loved, in a sense, and has delivered peace and prosperity to us. And I think that the issue will be whether this is now baked in America, whether we're going to have some kind of MAGA type government that isn't committed to democracy or democratic values or the rule of law, or whether it's going to swing back more towards what we've known before. And I'm not actually very optimistic on that. I think it's time that the main European powers have really got to get their act together. Germany's got the money to finance a military rearmament. Nobody wants it, but it's necessary with Putin there. It's the only thing he understands. And France and Britain have got the sort of experience and capabilities to do that. I can envisage a situation where Europe could possibly deliver, although not in the short term. In the medium to longer term, we're going to have to do that. And I hope that despite all the attempts to keep America on side, that really serious discussions about that are going on, about European capability and European defence behind the scenes.
So we have a question from Byron, another question from Byron saying, aside from the leverage hanging over Trump's head, is he enamored by Putin's wealth?
Yeah, I mean, what I find interesting, there was a poll done at the time of the Alaska summit. We all know how polarized American opinion is between Republican and Democrat at the moment. The poll was done about how popular Putin was with the electorate in America as a figure, as somebody who you would do business with. And what was remarkable was how unpopular Putin was right across the board. It's almost one of the few issues where both run-of-the-mill Republican voters and Democratic voters seem to agree. So Trump's penchant for Putin and his embrace of Putin, literal embrace of Putin on the red carpet, is completely out of kilter with his own political base and his own political support. It makes no sense to prioritize Russia over other countries, even India now, where Trump has effectively alienated India by refusing to impose secondary sanctions on other countries that are using Russian oil, like China and Turkey. So it doesn't make any sense. It's a complete anomaly. His behavior towards Putin is unlike his behavior towards anybody else. And I suspect there is an element here where Trump rather likes the idea of running America as an oligarchy in the same way that Putin is running Russia. Maybe less brutally, but certainly in terms of economic wealth and control and so on, that may be what he's aiming to do. And we've seen Elon Musk and other people that could fall into that kind of oligarchic category.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wanted to follow up with that question about talking about India, to say we recently had this meeting, Putin, Xi, Modi. So these countries are really aligning themselves against the West. Even, you know, India certainly has a very interesting relationship with countries that are very adversarial to you know, the kind of countries that India wants to do more business with. So can you talk to us about that splintering of these kind of camps that the world is heading into again, and you know what Europe needs to do to try and navigate those waters?
Well, yeah, I think in the longer term, this is the most worrying aspect of this war, the fact that it's so clearly a war of sovereignty and national independence. And yet, some major democracies or semi democracies in the global south, as it's called, like Brazil and India, Indonesia, and others, even Turkey, are not really on side. They don't really support Ukrainian independence or sovereignty. And I find that astonishing. Even Israel, of course, and Israel is a big problem in this equation, as you know, in that the arguments about territorial integrity, the rule of law, and so on, when applied to Ukraine, don't seem to be applied to Israel by America, certainly, and perhaps less agreed by Europe. And the charge of hypocrisy, which is actually a perfectly valid charge in my view, is played by these countries as an excuse to do business with Russia and not to stand tall into what is clearly one of the most egregious breaches of international law that we've seen for 80 years. And that's the reality. So I think going forward, you know, Europe in particular, because America is alienating these countries by its tariffs and its political interference. You'll see in Brazil, for example, that Trump has threatened some massive tariff against the Brazilians if they find their former president guilty of a constitutional coup, effectively, Bolsonaro. And that is really ratcheting up conflict with Brazil. It will only succeed in pushing Brazil into the hands of countries like China and India and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's certainly a concerning situation. So, look, we've had nearly 2,500 viewers tuning in tonight. So, really interesting conversation. If you're following along on YouTube, please do consider liking and subscribing, helping the channel really grow and to get more conversations like you're hearing with the wonderful guests that we've had so far, including Christopher Steele. And if you're following along on Twitter, watching along, the only way to interact with the show is to sign up on Twitch. Again, if you're on YouTube. So please do consider signing following up and following along and joining in with the with future shows. And if you've got any ideas, please do put them in the comment section of the YouTube section. So look, we're in the final part of the show, waiting for any audience questions. Stick them in the chat. I guess I've got one more question to you about the state of everything, really, is what do you think European countries can be doing more for Ukraine at the moment?
I think there are some obvious things they can be doing. One is short term, they could actually use the frozen Russian central bank assets, many of which are in Europe. As you know, I think 180 billion in Euroclear in Belgium alone, to either loan that money to Ukraine or to give it to Ukraine in order that Ukraine can finance its governance, its social security system, and potentially buy weapons from other parts of the world. And if need be, from America, if America's not prepared to give weapons to Ukraine, it could buy them with that money. And I think even Trump would find it difficult to turn that opportunity, that sort of deal away. I think on a more profound level, preparing Ukraine, making sure Ukraine is moving in the right direction in its own governance. And we saw this hiccup recently with the attempt to bring the Anti-Corruption Commission in Ukraine under sort of control of allies of Zelensky, which was a very bad false step by him. And it's important that things like that are dealt with directly and perhaps behind the scenes, but firmly by the Europeans in order to make sure Ukraine is moving in the right direction. Ukraine is potentially a very big asset economically and so on to the West. I mean, Putin was arguing today, I think, that he's never opposed Ukraine joining the EU, which is another lie from Putin, because, of course, in 2014, the whole Maidan issue and Yanukovych and so on was sparked by an attempt by Ukraine to move into some kind of customs union with the EU at Russia's expense. And so I think in all those regards, obviously Putin's word can't be believed, but Ukraine isn't without its problems and isn't without its challenges. And whilst we don't make a habit of criticizing Ukraine in public, Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government should be fully aware that we are alert to this. And although Ukraine has come a long way in the right direction, certainly since Yanukovych was toppled, there's still quite a long way to go. And, we want Ukraine to move in that correct direction going forward.
Well, sorry about that. Slowly turned you off for a second there. So look, I have one final question from the audience is what key shift do Western politicians have to make to get over the line from their malaise?
I think Western politicians, the problem is with Trump, of course, is that he is not like any other serious Western politician. I mean, you can argue about Orban and Fico, who's been in Tianjin or whatever, this summit for some unknown reason, the Slovak leader. But as far as the sort of big heavyweights in Europe are concerned, sort of 5 or 6 countries are led by serious leaders who are committed, I think, to the Ukrainian cause and to defending the rule of law. And I think they have got to get on with it, as has been termed a coalition of the willing, but on a wider level, a wider basis, sort of economically, politically, militarily, and so on. And sadly, they've got to rearm, and nobody wants this. I'd much rather we were spending our money on education and health and all the rest of it. But the first job of a government is to defend its country and defend its people. And sadly, in Europe and in Asia as well, with Xi, but particularly for us with Putin, we have got a major threat on our doorstep, someone we can't trust, someone who is militaristic, someone who is imperialist, and somebody who has to be stopped. And the only way it's going to be stopped is by strength and by deterrence and by the show of force. And so I think what has to happen is that despite the fact that Britain has left the EU, which was, in my view, a great mistake, we have to get ourselves together in Europe, use our wealth, use our technology, use our ability to work with each other. One thing we do have in the West is levels of trust between governments, amongst governments, which can't be replicated elsewhere. And it can't be replicated in the SCO, where they're all suspicious. Russia doesn't do proper alliances. The nature of Russian support for Iran was illustrated recently when Israel and America attacked Iran. Russia didn't lift a finger. So everybody knows that Russia doesn't do alliances. We do, and we've got to get good at it. We've got to get better at it.
So listen, thanks so much for joining us, Christopher. I'm going to put a link to your book down in the show notes. So if you're following along afterwards, you'll be able to buy a copy of that. It's called Unredacted, isn't it? Now, if people wanted to follow along more of your work, where's the best place to catch you and you know, your general writing and media appearances?
Yeah, I'm on X, Chris _D _Steele, and I'm on Blue Sky. And I appear fairly regularly in the media, including international media. But of course, it's not my day job, as it were. I mean, I'm a businessman. I run a professional intelligence company and working for clients. But certainly, I'm pretty active in the sort of public square and the public sphere now. And the best place to find me, as I say, is probably X and Blue Sky.
Well, I'll put those accounts handles in the show notes too. So thank you so much, Christopher. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to join us and answer these questions. Maybe have you come on in the future to update us on the situation in the world, hopefully with better news than it's been over the last few years, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe leave it on a note that very famously, when James Callaghan became British Prime Minister in the 1970s, when he had his first meeting with the then head of MI6, Maurice Oldfield, Callaghan said to him, well, Sir Maurice, what do you do? And he said, Prime Minister, I bring you bad news. And there's an element of that in intelligence work, I'm afraid. But it's important to be realistic and to know what's coming down the track and to plan for it and to counter it. And I think that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining us on the Oz Katerji Show. Take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Christopher Steele. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. So much to unpack there. So much interesting stuff. Again, I think Christopher has had a really, really, really bad rap about his work in the press, pushed in large part by, Trump outriders. But much of what he said really stacks up. And given the situation that we're in, watching, the America's descent into Trumpism, I do think it's important that we take stock of what actually happened over the last few years, that was proven, that we know happened in factual reality. So yeah, that was Christopher Steele. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode. Thank you to everyone following along on Twitch, all of you guys in the chat. I can't read all of that at the same time, but I will in a second before I sign out. But thank you to all of you engaging in the show. It seems to be growing. Like there's more of you, there's more chatter, so I'm really enjoying that. The numbers are slowly ticking up, and thank you so much to those of you who are following along on YouTube and so on. Every time you guys, more of you follow, that means more people watch the videos, and they get slowly helps us get bigger and bigger. I'm booking some pretty cool guests, so I certainly feel like the show is of a quality that should grow. I think these are. I think also, I don't want these to be felt like interviews. I'm bringing people on to have a conversation with them, and I don't know if that format works long term, but it's certainly something that I'm enjoying doing, and hopefully you guys are enjoying it too. So if you guys have got any thoughts about it, please do stick them in the YouTube comments. I'm going to dive into the chat to see what you've all been saying. Fascinating stuff. Thank you. Wow. Crouching Tiger, Byron Bite, Spazalot, Zebsd, all of you in there, Liquid Amber, Diddy Daedalus, this Noel, all of you, thank you so much for tuning in. I can't thank you enough. You guys are what makes this. If there was no one talking to me in the chat, I probably would stop doing these. But it's your input that really makes it, feel like I'm doing something different, not a podcast. It's I already have a podcast. It's doing pretty well, the numbers we get on it are pretty good. So this was always supposed to be something different, and I don't want to, in those shows I just ask a quick question and sit back and I wait, for the answer. And I want these shows to be a bit more, feel more free flowing, feel for more like conversations, and that only really works because of you guys chipping in. But yeah, listen, the best way to support me is by liking, subscribing, sharing. If you're not on Twitch yet, sign up to Twitch, follow me, help my numbers grow on Twitch, help me slowly migrate away from x.com, which I'm increasingly loath to use. If you're following along, watching the video on Twitter, and as I know hundreds of you are, please do consider following me on Twitch. I would really appreciate it. It helps us grow. Even if you never use Twitch, just do it for me, But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and particularly you guys on YouTube, because I use YouTube for other things like my film, film trailer, and a bunch of other stuff that I've done. So growing my audience there would really help the kind of journalism I do. And if you want to support my journalism, I am a full-time journalist. I'm doing this show kind of as a hobby, but if you want to support my work, there's the link. You can do so using that link, and I really do appreciate any donations that come there. I really do invest all of that stuff into like equipment to put it out there. All of my disposable income just goes back into doing the stuff that I love, and what I love doing is doing all of this stuff and telling the stories, particularly about Ukraine, that matter a lot to me. So listen, thank you all for joining. I've run out of water, so my throat is particularly dry, so I'm not going to carry on forever. We got a quick question. Byron saying, do you have a schedule of guests you can share? Byron, I share the schedule on my social media accounts every Monday. And that will tell you who's coming up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But because it's just me, I'm just booking the shows. I tend to book the shows in the week and then have them ready for the Monday to reveal. So far, I've managed to book 3 guests every week. I don't know if I'm going to manage to keep doing that. So, you never know. But also life might come up and I might not be able to do a show or whatever. So if you're really interested in finding out what's going on with the show, the schedule will always be on the Twitch channel in the schedule section on my channel, or it will be posted on my social media on Monday. On Monday, I will tell you what's going on with the show. And if there's going to be any change in the schedule, like I can't come to a show on a particular night, I will let you know again on the Monday and on the night itself. So if you're wondering where I am, it will be posted on the socials. I promise you that. But again, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for watching this show. The quality's been so high, you've been in awe, and can't think of questions at the time. Thank you, Liquid Amber. Thank you, Zebsd. Thank you, A Random Shot in the Dark. But do ask the questions. Think of the questions. Look, I've got a notepad. I have the notepad that I write so I can follow along. You should all get one of these, the Oz Katerji Show notepads. It will change your life. Anyway, much love. I'm going to throw the heart up tonight because you've all been absolute stars. I will see you tomorrow for the next show. We've got a British focused show, an economics show tomorrow. So I know the foreign policy guys will be like, oh, I don't like the British shows, but come along, it'll be fun. I think it might be relatively spicy. We've got Dr. Lawrence Newport, Looking for Growth. I think that we might have quite different political views. We've got a Syria-based show on the Thursday. And listen, I am looking to book some more interesting conversations in the coming weeks. I'm looking to have a debate at some point with a dear friend of mine, not someone I dislike, but someone I quite admire. But we have a very strong difference of opinion on certain free speech issues, and I thought that would be a fun thing to talk about on the show. So I'll see if we can get that booked in coming up for you. We've got some interesting shows coming up next week as well, so tune in. We're going to do Yemen next week. If you thought the Yemeni Prime Minister was killed, guess again, he's still alive. We're going to talk about who did die in Yemen. We're going to mention that. So yeah, do tune in next week as well. And yes, Spazalot. Hopefully there won't be Chinese peacekeepers. I don't think the Ukrainians are going to accept that. So, yes, exactly. All of this good stuff that you're putting in the chat, I'm going to put in the show. But yes, tune in. Listen. I love you all. Even Spazalot, who's getting very irate in the chat at times. Just relax, guys. This is a lovely space where we all kind of pull together. We're all on the same side here. So, the bigger this show gets, the more like there are going to be people that aren't on the same side as us. So let's pull together. I know that some of you are really black-pilled on Europe, and you're right to be for many, many reasons, but we're all, I'm European, so some of us are pulling in the right direction anyway. But look, it's all love. I will see you on the next show. Yeah, we can talk. We'll save the Houthi stuff for the Yemen episode, all right? And the Manchester United episode, I don't know if one will come. I did think about inviting one of the football journalists that follow me on, but we'll see. We'll see. Look, I'm trying to. It's hard to bring on, people from different spheres because I think people tune in for a specific type of thing. And, if I say, hey, we're going to do a football episode, people will be like, why would I watch a football podcast? So that's kind of the thinking behind it. I might branch out if there's like a football scandal of some kind, like a match fixing scandal or something like that, then maybe we'll dive into that. But we're going to try and keep it kind of loosely tied to politics and current affairs, very loosely, because I want to do an AI episode because I fucking hate AI. Russian meddling in football. Yeah, well, okay. You can see Old Trafford from your window. Oh, I wish I could see Old Trafford from my window. It's been a long time since I lived in Manchester. A long time. Anyway, that is for another show. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate you all. Keep coming back. This is the Oz Katerji show. I'm Oz Katerji. This is my show. That's a Morwenna Banks reference. If you don't know why I've been saying that, it certainly makes me chuckle every time I say it. So that's the reason why you stayed right till the end of the show and find something out. So there you go. Thank you all, everyone. I'll see you soon. I'll see you on the next one. See you tomorrow. Keep coming back and keep liking and sharing and subscribing and following and stuff. Yeah.